I'm Landon Hyatt, Gannon's mom, and I encourage you guys, I know many of you mothers and fathers, I encourage you just to find him. I'm so thankful for all the outpouring help that this case has brought. My son is a very loving kid. He wouldn't want harm on anybody at all. And it's so hard to just think, why is this happening to him? I have no clue. But my kid deserves to come home. My kid has a purpose. My kid has a life. And it's important to me. And it's important to everybody that's standing in this room. Gannon, Bubba, little man, mommy's hero, wherever you're at, mommy and daddy's here. And we're begging and pleading for you to come home. I know that's your biggest wish, is to see mommy and daddy standing here. We're here, Bubba. We're here for you, and I can't wait till you're found, because I have hope that you are going to be found. You are my hero. You are the reason why I have life. He's so special to me. I don't think many people can understand. My child was a 1 pound, 6 ounce baby. He had a 10% chance of survival. If he survived, he would be profoundly disabled. None of that is accurate. He's gifted and talented. Do anything for anybody. So I'm begging, I'm pleading, if anybody has any type of lead, put yourself in my situation. Ask yourself, what would you do? My Savior is a great Savior.
January 27, 2020. Colorado Springs, Colorado. A cold Monday afternoon in the quiet suburb of Lorson Ranch. Children were just beginning to return home from school. The air carried that familiar chill of winter. Homes stood still. Lawns sat empty. The sidewalks were silent. Inside one of those homes, 11-year-old Gannon Stauch had been playing video games just the day before, asking questions about his homework, and laughing at the family dog. Just a regular boy, in a regular neighborhood. By all accounts, it was just another ordinary day. But at 6:55 p.m., a call was placed to the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. Gannon was missing. His stepmother, Leticia Stauch, claimed he had gone to a friend's house and never returned. She sounded worried. Concerned. Her voice carried the right tones. She answered questions. She cooperated. At first, authorities weren't alarmed. Children wander off. They return. It's happened before. Reports were filed. A search was organized. Volunteers gathered. The community came together with flashlights and flyers. People whispered about the boy with the kind smile. Hope, in those early hours, still had room to breathe. But time moved forward. And Gannon did not come home. Within hours, the atmosphere shifted. Leticia's story began to stretch and bend. Details changed. Her memory flickered. The timeline wobbled. Detectives listened closely. Something wasn't right. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's camera showed Gannon getting into Leticia's red Nissan Frontier that morning. They left the driveway at 10:13 a.m. But hours later, when Leticia returned home, she was alone. No Gannon. She didn't mention this. Not to police. Not to the neighbors. Not even to Gannon's father. And then came the blood. Stains in Gannon's bedroom. Spatter. Smears. The carpet told a story no one wanted to hear. The mattress had absorbed more than dreams. Traces found in the garage. In the washing machine. On the bumper of Leticia's car. She said he must have cut his foot. Maybe a nosebleed. Kids get hurt. She insisted. Over and over again. Her voice grew rehearsed. The words more careful. She began crafting new explanations. One involved a break-in. Another, a man she claimed to have let into the house. Then, a bike accident. Each version contradicted the last. Still, no sign of Gannon. The public watched. The media waited. Letitia gave interviews. Smiling. Nodding. Wearing sunglasses. Blaming the sheriff's office. Saying they hadn't looked hard enough. Saying she was being treated unfairly. But the investigation was already moving. Quietly. Methodically. Behind closed doors, detectives were pulling records, checking mileage, following receipts. The puzzle pieces were starting to connect. Then came the arrest. March 2, 2020. Letitia Stauch was taken into custody in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, over 1,500 miles from Colorado. And 15 days later, the truth surfaced in the waters beneath a bridge in Pensacola, Florida. A suitcase. Small. Blue. Tossed into a quiet marshland. Lodged beneath the structure where traffic rumbled overhead, unnoticed for weeks. Inside, were the remains of Gannon Stauch. Folded. Packed. Hidden. 18 stab wounds. A gunshot to the head. Blunt force injuries. He had been killed in his own home. Dismembered. Transported across state lines. Discarded like nothing. And the woman who once promised to protect him, had orchestrated it all. This is not just the story of a murder. It's the story of deception, of betrayal within the walls of a family home, of a child failed by the one person who was supposed to watch over him while his father served the country. This is the case of Gannon Stauch. And over the next 3 hours, every lie, every trail of blood, every haunting piece of evidence, will be laid bare. Stay with us. Colorado Springs, Colorado. January 2020. A neighborhood tucked just south of the city, Lorson Ranch was the kind of place where people left porch lights on and waved at passing cars. Rows of identical houses lined streets with names like Grand Prix Court and Bent Grass Meadows. Military families, blue-collar workers, and retirees made up most of the population. It was safe. Predictable. Gannon lived in one of those homes. 11 years old, born September 29, 2008. He loved video games, especially Sonic the Hedgehog. He had a nervous smile, the kind that hovered between mischief and innocence. At school, he was shy, but polite. He called his mother every day. At the time of his disappearance, Gannon lived with his biological father, Albert Stauch, and his stepmother, Letitia. His mother, Landon Bullard, lived in another state but remained closely involved in his life. She spoke to him often and was preparing for his upcoming visit. There were no custody battles. No police reports. Just a child being raised in 2 homes. Albert was a career man in the National Guard. Deployed often. Gone for days or weeks at a time. Letitia was left in charge of the household. She cooked. Cleaned. Took care of Gannon and his younger sister. On the outside, it all looked normal. But normal doesn't leave blood on bedroom walls. On January 27, Albert was out of town on military orders. That morning, Gannon stayed home from school. Letitia told neighbors he had stomach problems. Surveillance cameras showed the boy walking out the front door with Letitia at 10:13 a.m. She drove away in her red Nissan Frontier. Gannon never came back. She returned hours later. Alone. No urgency. No panic. No call to the police. Instead, she told Albert via text that Gannon hadn't come back from a friend's house. At 6:55 p.m., she finally called authorities. Her voice didn't shake. She told them Gannon had gone to play and hadn't returned. He had a light jacket, she said. She wasn't sure who the friend was. Couldn't remember the exact address. The search began almost immediately. Deputies combed the neighborhood. Flyers were printed. Neighbors checked security footage. Letitia stood on the porch, answering questions. She said she was worried. She repeated it like a line from a script. 2 days later, her story changed. Now she said she'd been raped by a Hispanic man who had broken into the house and abducted Gannon. She gave him a name. Quincy Brown. She claimed he had held her at gunpoint and forced her to drive him around with Gannon in the truck. She described his clothes, his height, even gave a photograph of someone she insisted was the man. Investigators were baffled. The timeline didn't add up. There was no forced entry. No signs of a struggle. And no evidence of anyone else in the house. Then they looked at her search history. The words were chilling. I hate my stepson. He's ruined my life. How to get rid of a child. Can parents get away with murder? She'd been researching days before Gannon disappeared. Forensic teams moved in. They found blood stains soaked deep into the carpet in Gannon's bedroom. A piece of carpet had been cut out. Bleach had been used, but not enough. Blood traced down the hallway, into the garage. On the driver's side door of the truck. On cleaning supplies. On the washing machine. She tried to cover it. But the walls remembered. On February 1st, Letitia rented a van. She drove alone. First to Texas. Then to Florida. She stayed in hotels. Paid in cash. Traveled by night. No one knew what she was carrying. On February 5th, she returned home. Calm. 3 weeks later, Gannon's body was found inside a suitcase under a bridge in Pensacola. The suitcase was partially submerged in water. It had been thrown from the bridge and wedged in the mud below. Inside, wrapped in blankets and plastic, was what remained of the boy. 18 stab wounds. A bullet lodged in his skull. Defensive wounds on his arms and hands. Letitia hadn't just killed him. She'd tried to erase him. But justice had already started moving. On March 2, 2020, Letitia was arrested in Myrtle Beach. She denied everything. Then confessed. Then denied again. Each time, a new story. At her trial in 2023, she pled not guilty by reason of insanity. She claimed she had dissociative identity disorder. That someone else inside her had done it. That she hadn't been present. But the evidence said otherwise. She had cleaned the scene. Driven thousands of miles. Lied in multiple interviews. Manipulated her husband. Changed phones. Used burner accounts. Deleted messages. Wiped GPS logs. There was no dissociation. Only calculation. In May 2023, a jury found Letitia Stauch guilty on all counts: murder in the first degree, child abuse resulting in death, tampering with a deceased human body, tampering with evidence. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Plus 156 years. The courtroom fell silent as Landon, Gannon's mother, cried through her victim impact statement. Albert sat frozen. The verdict didn't bring Gannon back. But it gave his name justice. The home in Lorson Ranch remains standing. But the windows are dark now. Neighbors walk past a little faster. Porch lights still glow, but the warmth they once carried is gone. And somewhere in Florida, under a bridge most people will never notice, a single flower rests near a concrete support beam. A reminder that a boy once lived. That he mattered. And that even the most quiet places can hold unspeakable truths. This is only the beginning. From the beginning, Letitia Stauch played a careful game. She knew how to sound concerned. She knew what to say. When to cry. When to appear helpless. She understood the optics. She gave interviews. She made Facebook posts. She told friends, "They're targeting me." She accused law enforcement of neglect. Of bias. Of tunnel vision. What the public didn't see was what investigators already knew. Letitia wasn't just a stepmother caught in the whirlwind of tragedy. She was a suspect with a timeline that didn't hold. A woman whose explanations cracked with each new detail uncovered. The story had changed too many times. First, Gannon walked to a friend's house. Then, he was kidnapped by a stranger. Then, an intruder sexually assaulted her and took the boy. She couldn't keep it straight. And every time she spoke, more questions surfaced. Why hadn't she called the police right away? Why was there no record of this friend's house? Why were Gannon's blood and tissue found soaked into his mattress? The search team had their answer, even if Letitia wouldn't give it to them. But they still had to prove it. Detectives combed through data. Her phone records revealed deleted messages. Travel logs. GPS coordinates. Security camera footage from stores she visited. Hotel receipts. On January 28, the day after Gannon disappeared, Letitia rented a car. A white Kia Rio. Investigators pulled GPS data from the vehicle. The car had been driven to remote rural locations outside Colorado Springs. Hours logged. Miles recorded. They found more traces of blood inside that rental car. Later that same day, she returned the Kia and rented another vehicle, a moving van. She told the rental company she was helping a family member relocate. In truth, she was preparing to dispose of Gannon's remains. They had no body. Not yet. But they had motive. Opportunity. And overwhelming circumstantial and forensic evidence. On March 2, 2020, they made the call. Letitia Stauch was arrested in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where she had fled after the investigation intensified. She was charged with murder in the first degree, child abuse resulting in death, and tampering with evidence. She was extradited back to Colorado. Inside the courtroom, she stood motionless. No tears. No apologies. No explanation. Then, she spoke. She told the court she wasn't guilty. That she had suffered a mental break. That a personality named Maria had taken control of her body and committed the crime. She said she didn't remember the killing. She said it wasn't her. The prosecution was prepared. They brought in expert witnesses. Psychologists. Forensic analysts. Former friends and family members. All of them painting the same picture: Letitia Stauch was not mentally ill. She was manipulative. Calculating. Cold. The jury watched footage from her interviews. They read her text messages. They heard her voice on jail calls, mocking the investigation. Laughing at how easy it had been. Calling Gannon's biological mother names. Blaming Albert. Blaming the system. They listened to the medical examiner describe the injuries in clinical, excruciating detail. 18 stab wounds. A gunshot. Evidence of dismemberment. Plastic fibers from the suitcase embedded in the child's skin. The courtroom sat in silence. Jurors avoided eye contact. Reporters stared at their notepads. Gannon's mother sobbed uncontrollably. This wasn't temporary insanity. This was murder. A betrayal so profound, so calculated, that it defied the basic understanding of motherhood, of caregiving, of human decency. On May 8, 2023, after weeks of testimony and cross-examinations, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty. On all counts. The sentence was swift and final. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Plus 156 years for the additional charges. Letitia Stauch will die behind bars. But the impact of what she did, what she took, cannot be measured in years. Gannon's family will never watch him graduate. They'll never see him fall in love, grow up, or chase his dreams. His room is empty. His shoes still sit by the door. His game controller lies untouched. This case was more than a headline. It was a failure of trust. A quiet home turned into a crime scene. A child who thought he was safe, who went for a ride with someone he knew, and never came back. And still, even after justice, the question lingers. Why? Why did she do it? No answer has ever been given. No reason that could ever be enough. But this much remains true: Gannon Stauch mattered. He mattered in life. He matters in memory. And through every painful revelation, every tear shed, every hour spent searching in the cold, one truth echoes louder than any verdict. He was loved. He was loved. Leticia's arrest didn't close the case. In many ways, it was just the beginning of a deeper, darker unraveling. Once she was behind bars, the lies didn't stop. In fact, they multiplied. New stories. New versions. New accusations. She wrote letters from jail. Long, rambling narratives filled with contradictions, paranoia, and invented characters. She claimed she was framed. She accused the FBI of fabricating evidence. She blamed her own daughter for planting the blood. She insisted the police had ignored her cries for help. Each letter told a different tale. Each one less believable than the last. She tried to escape, too. In September 2020, Leticia hatched a plan inside the El Paso County Jail. She wrote instructions on how to break through her cell window, hide in laundry carts, and flee through drainage tunnels. Guards found the drawings. The plan was detailed. She had been studying escape routes. Measuring air vents. It didn't work. She was placed in solitary confinement. Then transferred to a more secure facility. But her behavior in custody only reinforced what prosecutors already believed: she wasn't suffering from mental illness. She was manipulative. She was dangerous. She was capable of extraordinary deception. And behind her ever-changing stories was the unchanging truth: she had killed a child. Gannon's parents tried to carry on. Albert Stauch, the father who had trusted Leticia to care for his son while he served the country, was wrecked with guilt. He testified during the trial. Sat through every hearing. Stared at the woman he once called his wife as prosecutors detailed the horror inside their home. Landon Bullard, Gannon's biological mother, became the face of the family's grief. Her voice cracked every time she spoke. She refused to let her son be remembered as just another victim. She posted his photos online. Shared videos of him laughing. Smiling. Dancing in the living room. She wanted people to see him. To remember him as more than a name in a courtroom. And they did. The community rallied around the family. Candles were lit. Vigils held. A foundation was launched in Gannon's name. But the questions didn't end with the trial. Why weren't warning signs caught earlier? Why was Leticia left alone with the children despite concerns about her behavior? What systems were in place to protect children in blended families like Gannon's, and why hadn't they worked? Lawmakers and advocates began calling for reform. They urged for more rigorous background checks for stepparents in guardianship roles. More education for teachers on spotting abuse, even in mild or masked forms. More power given to biological parents who express concern, even after divorce. Gannon's case exposed not just a horrific act of violence, but the cracks in the safety net meant to prevent it. For every hour that passed with him missing, for every mile his body was transported, for every moment his blood was being scrubbed from the walls, there was a failure, small or large, that let it happen. And that's what haunts people the most. It wasn't random. It wasn't a stranger in the night. It was someone trusted. Someone who smiled at school pickup. Someone who cooked dinner. Helped with homework. Tucked him in. Leticia Stauch didn't explode in a moment of rage. She prepared. She cleaned. She lied. She moved a body across state lines. It was deliberate. It was methodical. And for that, she will never walk free again. But freedom is relative. Albert lives in a prison of memories. A home once filled with laughter now reduced to echoes. Landon carries a grief too big for words. She posts photos of Gannon's birthday every year. Says goodnight to a boy who can no longer answer. And the world keeps asking why. But there are no answers that can make this right. There are only the facts. A suitcase found under a bridge. A mother's endless sorrow. And a name that must never be forgotten. Gannon. He was more than a victim. He was more than a headline. He was a son, a brother, a friend. He deserved to grow up. He deserved to live. And though his voice was silenced, the truth speaks for him now. It speaks in the courtroom records. In the photos taped to a mailbox. In the hearts of those who loved him. And in the promise that no child's pain will be ignored again. Not ever. March 17, 2020. A little more than 7 weeks had passed since Gannon disappeared. 7 weeks of search teams combing wooded areas, drainage ditches, and frozen hillsides. 7 weeks of tip lines, press conferences, false sightings, and heartbreak. 7 weeks of waiting. Wondering. Dreading. Then came a call. In Pensacola, Florida, 1,377 miles from Gannon's home in Colorado. Construction workers doing routine cleanup under a bridge on the Escambia River noticed a suitcase lodged in thick mud beneath the overpass. It had been there for some time. Partially hidden. Partially submerged. It took effort to pull it free. The zipper was corroded. The outer fabric torn. What they found inside would bring the entire country to a standstill. Wrapped in blankets and plastic, decomposing but unmistakable, were the remains of Gannon Stauch. He had been transported across the country inside a suitcase. Discarded like garbage beneath a bridge thousands of miles from home. When authorities arrived, the scene became sacred. The bridge was closed. The area sealed off. The FBI was called in. It took days to confirm the identity. But the clothing, the dental records, the injuries, it was Gannon. The autopsy report would later describe it in clinical detail. 18 stab wounds. A gunshot to the jaw that fractured his skull. Blunt force trauma to the head. Multiple sharp force injuries to the chest and back. Signs of dismemberment. There was no chance of survival. No mistake. No mercy. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a sudden loss of control. This was a killing planned and executed in stages, from the moment Gannon stayed home that Monday morning, to the final second Letitia zipped the suitcase closed and hurled it into the water. And she didn't stop there. She drove home. She acted normal. She gave interviews. She mocked law enforcement. She laughed in phone calls. She slept in the same bed. But her story began to collapse under the weight of evidence. Letitia had rented a budget van days after Gannon's disappearance. Investigators traced the vehicle's GPS. They built a timeline, mile by mile, city by city. From Colorado, through Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and into Florida. Surveillance footage from hotels confirmed her presence along the route. She'd stayed alone. She'd used fake names. Paid in cash. What she didn't know was that the very suitcase used to hide Gannon had been purchased during that trip. Records showed the transaction. The store's cameras captured her entering and exiting. She was leaving a trail, even while trying to vanish. The FBI pulled data from her phone. Messages deleted. Calls wiped. But even with efforts to erase her steps, the cloud remembered. GPS coordinates placed her within 1 mile of the Escambia River Bridge on the same day the suitcase was believed to have been discarded. Letitia was arrested on March 2, before the body was found. But the discovery of Gannon's remains sealed everything. There was no more doubt. This was the moment the case changed. The moment investigators could finally say the words out loud, this was murder. Brutal. Intentional. And personal. When Gannon's mother, Landon, received the news, she collapsed. She had been holding on to hope. Despite everything. Despite the evidence. Despite the silence. A mother always hopes. Albert stood in uniform outside the courtroom weeks later, his hands trembling as he read a statement to the press. He had trusted Letitia. Loved her. Married her. Left his son in her care. He looked into the cameras and asked only one thing, "Remember my boy?" Letitia's response was chilling. From her jail cell, she began to prepare her defense. She claimed multiple personalities. Said a different version of herself had done it. A woman named Maria. She said she didn't remember the killing. She said she blacked out. That the real Letitia would never hurt a child. Psychiatrists were brought in. The courtroom became a battle of experts. But the prosecution had a mountain of facts. The blood spatter in Gannon's bedroom matched the wounds. The bullets matched the firearm Letitia had access to. The fibers on his body matched the suitcase and the blankets in their home. And her internet search history told the rest. I hate my stepson. I feel like killing him. How long does it take for a body to smell? There was no alternate personality. There was no blackout. There was only Letitia. And when faced with the truth, even the jury had nowhere to turn. They watched the body cam footage from the day she reported Gannon missing. They heard the fake sobs. The careful words. The lies layered over lies. They saw the van's route. The receipts. The blood. The bones. They read her handwritten letters from jail. Pages and pages of fiction, written by a woman who believed she could still talk her way out of a nightmare of her own making. But this time, no one was listening. The truth had arrived. And it carried the weight of a little boy's life. The trial began on March 20, 2023, in Colorado Springs. 3 years after Gannon's murder, the courtroom doors opened, and the nation's attention turned back to the one woman at the center of the most heartbreaking case the city had ever seen. Letitia Stauch entered wearing a pale-colored sweater, her hair combed, her face blank. No emotion. No apology. No acknowledgement of the boy whose name echoed through every hallway. Inside the courtroom, Gannon's family sat on one side. His biological mother, Landon, held a photograph of her son in her lap. His father, Albert, leaned forward, hands clenched, trying to hold his composure. Around them were neighbors, friends, reporters, and members of the public who had followed the case from the very beginning. Letitia's defense made its position clear in opening statements. Not guilty by reason of insanity. They claimed she was suffering from dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder, and that she wasn't fully aware of her actions at the time of Gannon's death. The voice they said committed the murder was not hers. It belonged to someone else. An alternate identity named Maria, created out of childhood trauma and mental illness. But as the prosecution stood, the tone changed. They began not with allegations, but with Gannon. They showed a video of him laughing on Christmas morning. They let the jury hear his voice. They introduced him as a child, not a case number. A boy who loved Sonic, who stayed up late watching YouTube videos, who wanted to be an astronaut. Then they laid out the evidence. Blood patterns in the room showed that Gannon had been attacked while lying on his bed. The mattress was soaked through. Blood had seeped into the wood. It wasn't one wound. It was many. 18 stab wounds. 1 gunshot to the lower left jaw. Blunt force trauma to the head. The stab wounds pierced his lungs. His liver. 1 fractured his ribcage. Some injuries showed hesitation marks. Some were deep and final. The medical examiner explained that the cause of death wasn't just one thing. It was multiple, together, layered over each other like a final, brutal storm. Then came the digital evidence. Letitia had searched, "I hate my stepson, I feel like killing him, what if a person bleeds to death in a room, and, can a person clean up blood with baking soda?" She deleted texts. Cleared her browser history. Changed her phone settings. Lied to investigators again and again. They brought in FBI analysts, digital forensic experts, cell tower specialists. All of them told the same story: Letitia planned this. She concealed it. And she fled. The jury saw receipts from her cross-country trip. They saw her face on hotel surveillance cameras. Heard the testimony of the clerk who checked her in. They followed the route of her rented van, state by state, mile by mile, until it stopped in Pensacola. Then they showed the suitcase. The image was grainy. Haunting. A small blue suitcase, mud-stained, torn at the seams. Inside, wrapped in multiple layers of bedding and plastic, were the remains of Gannon Stauch. They showed the autopsy photos. Members of the jury looked away. One asked for a break. Landon sobbed quietly, her face in her hands. Albert wiped his eyes, barely breathing. No one in that courtroom was prepared. No one ever could be. Then, the defense took its turn. They called expert witnesses. A psychologist who testified that Letitia exhibited signs of trauma. That she may have dissociated. That she could have created an alternate personality in response to stress. But under cross-examination, the prosecution reminded the jury of her letters. Dozens of pages, written in jail, laying out fake versions of events. Her escape plan. Her instructions for busting through a window with a spoon. Her maps. Her drawings. Her codes. This was not a woman in a fugue state. This was a woman controlling every step. They played a jailhouse call where she laughed about media coverage. Where she mocked Gannon's mother. Where she blamed Albert for leaving her alone. Letitia never took the stand. She sat, mostly quiet. No breakdowns. No emotion. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. Closing arguments began on May 3, 2023. The prosecution reminded the jury that insanity doesn't plan a cross-country trip. It doesn't purchase cleaning supplies and write escape plans. It doesn't create fake characters to blame. Insanity doesn't search for ways to kill. Insanity doesn't hide a body. The defense tried to convince the jury that Letitia needed help, not punishment. But the jury had seen enough. On May 8, the verdict was read. Guilty. On all counts. First-degree murder. Child abuse resulting in death. Tampering with a deceased human body. Tampering with physical evidence. The courtroom fell silent. There were no cheers. No outbursts. Just silence. A moment of gravity. Of justice. Letitia was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Plus an additional 156 years for her other crimes. She showed no reaction. No remorse. She was escorted out in cuffs, eyes forward, leaving behind a room full of pain she never once acknowledged. Outside the courthouse, Landon spoke to the press. Her voice shaking, she held up Gannon's photo and said, "My son mattered. He wasn't a case. He was a light in my life. And he always will be." Albert stood behind her. Broken. Exhausted. Still carrying the weight of a decision he would never stop reliving. The trial was over. But the grief was just beginning. For Gannon Stauch's family, justice was something they had waited for, but it was not the resolution they had ever hoped for. They were left in an unending void, a chasm that could never be filled. Elena, Gannon's mother, would never stop asking herself why she hadn't seen the signs earlier. His stepmother, Letitia, would never be able to explain the truth of the matter. Every time she opened her mouth in court, every statement she made, the walls around her grew thicker, until she was trapped in a world of lies of her own making. The trial was a spectacle, the tension in the courtroom palpable as Letitia's every movement was scrutinized. For weeks, her defense team tried to craft a story of her innocence, casting doubt on the evidence, suggesting that someone else could have been responsible. But the evidence was undeniable. Every piece of forensic data, every witness, every inconsistency in her story led back to her. The text messages. The GPS coordinates. The blood evidence. The broken bones in Gannon's body, each one a silent testament to the brutality of what had happened to him. But what was truly chilling was the lack of remorse from Letitia. Her cold demeanor stood in stark contrast to the broken-hearted cries of the Stauch family. It was as though she had detached herself from the reality of her actions, as if the consequences didn't weigh on her at all. Even as the jury deliberated, it was clear to everyone in the courtroom that the weight of the crime would hang over the community forever. When the verdict was finally read, it echoed throughout the courthouse like a thunderclap. Guilty on all counts. The air seemed to freeze, as if time itself had stopped in that moment. Letitia sat motionless, her face a mask of disbelief, her eyes wide, but not with shock. There was something else there. Something darker. Something that hinted at a long-hidden knowledge of her inevitable fate. But there was no escaping the law now. The sentencing was a formality. The judge's words were stern and final, a reminder that the justice system had done its work. But the true tragedy remained: Gannon was gone, and nothing could bring him back. His family, especially Elena, would forever be haunted by the loss. No matter how many years Letitia would serve in prison, it would never make up for the life that had been stolen from them. As Letitia was led away, the courtroom felt strangely empty. The weight of what had transpired hung in the air, a reminder that justice, while necessary, could never undo the damage done. The Stauch family left the courthouse in silence, their faces etched with grief. The cameras followed them, capturing every moment, but no photo, no interview, could encapsulate the pain they felt. No one would ever truly understand the depth of their loss. In the months that followed, the case continued to make headlines. People couldn't look away from the tragedy, couldn't forget the image of Gannon's innocent face, so full of life and promise. The media speculated endlessly about Letitia's motives. Was it jealousy? Was it control? Was it something even darker? But in the end, none of those questions mattered. The truth had been revealed, and it would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. For Elena, life would never be the same. Every day was a struggle, but she carried on. She spoke out, sharing her son's story, determined to make sure the world knew what had happened to him. In her heart, she clung to the memories of Gannon, his laughter, his smile, the way he used to brighten every room he entered. She found some comfort in knowing that justice had been served, but it was never enough. Nothing would ever be enough. And as for Letitia, her fate was sealed. She would spend the rest of her life in prison, but even there, she would never escape the shadows of what she had done. The truth was inescapable. It was written in the evidence, it was spoken in the courtroom, and it would follow her forever. She would never be free of the guilt, the shame, or the consequences of her actions. The story of Gannon Stauch's life, and the horror of his death, would remain etched in the memory of everyone who followed the case. A story of betrayal, manipulation, and the unspeakable evil that can sometimes lie behind the most familiar faces. The aftermath was a reminder that even in the face of justice, there are no winners. Only those left behind, haunted by the loss of a life that should never have been taken. As we close the chapter on Gannon Stauch's heartbreaking story, we are reminded of the importance of vigilance, love, and protection for the ones we hold dear. The pain of his family, the echoes of justice, and the lives forever changed are a stark reminder that sometimes, evil can hide in the most unexpected places. If you or someone you know is facing a situation where safety or trust is in question, don't wait for things to escalate. Speak out. Seek help. You don't have to face it alone. There are resources available. Helplines, support groups, and professionals who can guide you through the darkness and back into the light. And, as we reflect on Gannon's life, let it be a reminder to cherish every moment with those we love. Never take a day for granted. Stay informed, stay alert, and never be afraid to stand up for what's right. If you're inspired to learn more or get involved in supporting causes that bring justice and awareness to similar situations, please hit the like and subscribe button below. Let's work together to make sure stories like Gannon's are never forgotten and that justice continues to prevail. Thank you for listening. Stay safe, stay aware, and always protect those you love.